Most people believe influence is something you earn with confidence, status, or charisma. That's the comfortable lie. The uncomfortable truth is simpler. People follow the person whose language makes their nervous system feel safe, focused, and guided, often before they consciously agree with anything being said. You can watch it happen in real time. Two people say the same idea. One gets resistance. The other gets attention. One gets questions. The other gets compliance. The difference isn't volume. It isn't energy. It's structure. How the words are arranged, when meaning is revealed, how choices are framed, and how the listener's mind is led to finish the sentence for you. Most people speak at others. Advanced influence speaks to the listener's own mind. And that's why most attempts at persuasion fail. They aim at logic, when human decisions are filtered through identity, emotion, and prediction, mostly subconscious. People don't reject your ideas first. They reject the feeling your language creates. Pressure, danger, disrespect, uncertainty, boredom. Advanced hypnotic language patterns don't control minds. That's amateur fantasy. What they do is far more real and more subtle. They shape attention, lower needless resistance, and guide meaning in a way that feels natural to the listener. In this audiobook, you'll learn to build sentences that do four things at once. Command attention without demanding it. Reduce resistance without begging for agreement. Guide conversations without obvious force. Build authority through language alone before you prove anything. You're not learning tricks. You're learning architecture. Because influence isn't a moment. It's a sequence. Most people try to win with one perfect line. Advanced speakers build a path. Each sentence prepares the next. Each phrase narrows the possible interpretations. Each pause gives the listener's brain time to accept the frame you set. Here's the tension. The listener must feel free, while you remain in control of direction. That's where patterns matter. Conscious speaking is what you intend to say. Subconscious influence is what the listener is forced to assume in order to understand you. The human mind hates incomplete meaning. It fills gaps automatically. The moment your language creates a gap, an unfinished pattern, the mind completes it. That completion feels personal, internal, true. This is a core of advanced hypnotic language. You design sentences that invite the listener to do the mental work. Then they feel ownership over the conclusion. Not because you tricked them, because you use the brain's normal operating system. Now, there's a line we will not cross. Influence without respect becomes manipulation, and manipulation eventually destroys trust, reputation, and outcomes. What you're learning here is ethical power, the ability to communicate with precision, presence, and direction without confusion, pressure, or games. If that's what you want, you're in the right place. Let's begin. The first rule of advanced hypnotic language is this: control the frame before you deliver the content. Content is the idea. The frame is the lens. If you speak content without a frame, the listener supplies one, based on their mood, insecurities, past experiences, and biases. And that means you surrender control immediately. A frame answers questions the listener is already asking subconsciously. What is happening here? Who is leading? Is this safe or threatening? What does this mean about me? What am I expected to do next? When your language answers those questions calmly and indirectly, Resistance drops. When your language ignores those questions, the listener's brain fills them with suspicion. So the first skill is not saying impressive things. It's setting the conditions under which anything you say will land. You do that with 3 tools: presupposition, pacing, and permission. Presupposition is the hidden assumption inside a sentence. It's what must be true for the sentence to make sense. If I say, when you start using these patterns, you'll notice people listening differently, I've presupposed that you will start using them. I didn't argue it. I didn't ask permission. I built it into the grammar. This isn't magic. It's normal language. But most people use presuppositions accidentally. Advanced speakers use them deliberately and ethically to guide attention to what matters. Pacing is the act of describing reality so accurately that the listener unconsciously agrees. Once agreement is established, you can lead. For example, you're listening to this because you've noticed something. Some people can speak a few words and shift the whole room. That's pacing. It doesn't demand belief. It mirrors an experience many listeners already have. The mind nods along. Permission is the softest form of authority. It removes pressure. It tells the listener they are not trapped. Paradoxically, this makes them more willing to follow. For example, you don't have to accept everything immediately. Just notice what changes when you shift a few words. That message creates safety. Safety creates attention. Attention creates influence. Now combine these 3 and you get a frame that feels natural. You pace the listener's experience. You presuppose the next step. You give permission to avoid resistance. Here is what that sounds like in real speech. You've probably had moments where you said the right thing and still didn't land, and you knew it wasn't the idea that failed. It was how it entered their mind. So as you listen, don't try to memorize every line. Just notice how your attention moves when the structure changes. Notice what happened. It validates the listener. It points to a hidden cause, how it entered their mind. It gives a gentle instruction. Don't try to memorize. It shifts the goal from effort to observation. That's frame control. The second rule is this: attention is the currency, not agreement. If you can't hold attention, you can't lead anyone anywhere. People often chase agreement too early, trying to force yes before the listener is ready. That creates resistance. Advanced speakers lead attention first. When attention is stable, agreement becomes easier. How do you lead attention? You create contrast, open loops, and precision. Contrast means you show 2 realities, the one that fails and the one that works. The brain naturally moves toward the better option. Example, you can push your point and create tension, or you can guide the conversation so they feel like the idea was theirs. That contrast makes the listener feel the direction. Open loops are unfinished patterns that the brain wants to close. The simplest example is, in a moment, I'll show you the exact phrase that changes this. The mind waits. It leans in, but open loops must be used with integrity. If you tease and never deliver, you train distrust. If you open a loop and close it cleanly, you train attention. Precision means you remove vague language that invites argument. You don't say, "You need be more persuasive." That triggers ego defenses. Instead, you say, change the first 10 seconds of your sentence, and you change the listener's posture. That's precise. It's observable. The brain respects it. Now, one of the most advanced patterns is embedded direction, guiding someone while sounding descriptive. This works because the subconscious mind responds strongly to verbs, actions, especially when they're wrapped inside a sentence that seems neutral. Example: as people begin to listen, they often relax their shoulders and focus. Inside that sentence is an embedded invitation. Relax, focus. You didn't command it. You described it. The listener's brain can follow without feeling controlled. Another advanced pattern is choice architecture, offering options that all lead forward. Most people ask questions that invite no. Do you want to do this? Invites refusal. Advanced speakers ask questions that assume forward movement. Do you want to start with the simplest pattern or the most powerful one first? Either choice keeps direction. You're not trapping people. You're removing dead ends. Then there is identity linking, connecting a behavior to who someone believes they are. People will resist changing behavior. They will fight to protect identity. But if a behavior is framed as proof of identity, they adopt it. Example: if you're the kind of person who wants clean results, you will prefer patterns that reduce resistance rather than increase pressure. That sentence presupposes a listener is a clean results type. It invites them to align. Used ethically, identity linking is powerful and respectful. It speaks to a higher version of the listener, not a weaker one. Used unethically, it becomes manipulation, shaming, cornering, exploiting insecurity. We won't do that here. Now let's make this practical. If you want your language to feel hypnotic, meaning it naturally holds attention and guides meaning, start with this simple shift. Stop speaking in statements. Start speaking in sequences. A sequence has 4 steps. Pace reality. Here's what's happening. Name the hidden cause. Here's why it happens. Offer a new frame. Here's a better way to see it. Give a next step. Now do this. Example sequence. You've noticed that some conversations become a battle the moment you speak. That's not because your point is wrong. It's because your language signals pressure. So instead of trying to convince, start by guiding attention and watch how quickly resistance drops. This sequence works because it leads the mind. It doesn't argue. It guides. And that is the difference between basic persuasion and advanced hypnotic language patterns. You design the listener's experience moment by moment. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the mechanics of presuppositions, how to build them cleanly, how to avoid sounding artificial, and how to use them in everyday speech so people feel guided, not pushed. But for now, remember the foundation. Control the frame. Let attention. Speak in sequences. If you master those 3, everything else becomes easier because now your words don't just carry information, they carry direction. Presuppositions are the quiet engine of influence. They don't shout. They don't argue. They don't beg for agreement. They simply assume a reality and then invite the listener's mind to step into it. Most people think persuasion is about proving, but proving creates friction because the moment you try to prove something, you trigger a hidden contest inside the listener. Should I accept this or resist it? Even if they don't say it out loud, their nervous system decides whether your words feel like pressure or guidance. Presuppositions bypass that contest because they don't demand a verdict. They embed the truth inside the grammar. They make the listener's mind do what it always does when it hears language. It tries to understand the sentence. And to understand the sentence, it has to temporarily accept the assumptions hidden inside it. That temporary acceptance is the opening, not for manipulation, for direction. The difference matters. If you use presuppositions to corner people, you create compliance without respect. And compliance without respect always collapses. But if you use presuppositions to reduce confusion, increase clarity, and guide attention toward outcomes that benefit both sides, you become the kind of communicator people trust. You become calm authority. Here's what a presupposition is. In the simplest form, a statement that can only be processed if certain things are assumed to be true. For example, if I say, when you start noticing these patterns, your conversations will change. The brain must accept two assumptions just to understand the sentence. You will start noticing these patterns. Conversations will change. I didn't ask if you will. I didn't argue why you should. I simply built it into the structure. This is not a trick. It's normal language. You already use presuppositions constantly. Where do you put the keys? Presupposes you put the keys somewhere. How did you manage to do that? Presupposes you did it. What will you do next? Presupposes there will be a next action. The point isn't whether presuppositions exist. They do. The point is whether you use them unconsciously, randomly, creating confusion and resistance, or whether you use them deliberately, cleanly, and ethically, creating clarity and direction. There are 4 presupposition families you need to master first. Time, cause, identity, and sequence. Time presuppositions are the easiest to spot and the safest to use. They assume something will happen and place it in time. When you get comfortable with this, presupposes you'll get comfortable after you try this once. Presupposes you will try it. Before you respond, presupposes you will respond. Time presuppositions create forward movement. They move the listener's mind from if to when. And that shift is massive because if invites debate and uncertainty, while it invites planning, because presuppositions link one thing to another. They assume a cause and effect relationship. That's why you feel resistance when you push too hard. Presupposes you push too hard, and that resistance follows. The moment you slow down your speech, people listen differently. Presupposes slowing down changes attention. Because presuppositions are powerful because the brain loves explanations, but they're also dangerous if you use them carelessly. If you invent causes that don't fit the listener's experience, they will feel manipulated, even if you don't intend it. So here's the rule. Only use cause presuppositions that are either obviously true or immediately testable. If the listener can verify it within minutes, it feels like insight. If they can't verify at all, it feels like mythology. Identity presuppositions are the strongest and the most sensitive. They attach a behavior or preference to who the person is. If you're the kind of person who values precision, presupposes they value precision. A man who respects himself doesn't beg for attention, he guides it. Presupposes a certain identity standard. Identity presuppositions can lift people into a higher version of themselves, or they can shame them into compliance. And shame-based influence is poison. It works short-term, then it produces resentment, avoidance, or quiet sabotage. Ethical identity presuppositions do one thing. They invite the listener to claim a higher identity without forcing them to defend their ego. The clean way to do that is to make identity a door, not a trap. A door sounds like people who want clean results tend to prefer. Not, if you were smart, you would. Sequence presuppositions are what advanced speakers use to guide action without sounding controlling. They assume steps. First, notice a reaction, then adjust the phrasing. Presupposes you will notice and adjust. Let's start with the simplest pattern, then move to the stronger one. Presupposes we will move through steps together. Sequence presuppositions reduce mental chaos. They make the listener feel guided, not pressured. They create structure, and structure creates safety. Now, here's the reason presuppositions sometimes fail. People overuse them, or they use the wrong ones at the wrong time. When a person is calm and curious, presuppositions slide in easily. When a person is tense, defensive, or suspicious, presuppositions can feel like being pushed. So you must calibrate. There are 3 states you should always recognize in the listener. Open state, curious, relaxed, receptive. Neutral state, listening, uncertain, evaluating. Closed state, defensive, irritated, resistant. In an open state, you can use stronger presuppositions, especially time and sequence. In a neutral state, you use gentle presuppositions with pacing. You mirror reality first, then you lead. In a closed state, you use permission and observation. You lower pressure before you guide. This matters because the goal is not to win. The goal is to keep the channel open while maintaining direction. Here's how you do that. In a neutral or closed state, start with a presupposition that contains freedom. It sounds like, you don't have to decide right now. Just notice what happens when we frame it this way. This presupposes they will notice, but also removes the threat of immediate commitment. That's the difference between clean and sloppy influence. Sloppy influence tries to take something. Clean influence guides something. Now let's make it practical with the biggest presupposition mistake most people make. They presuppose a conclusion before the listener is ready. They say things like, when you agree with me, when you see I'm right, after you realize this is the best option. That triggers the ego. It triggers resistance. It also signals insecurity because confident authority doesn't need to force agreement inside the grammar. A better approach is to presuppose the process, not the conclusion. Presuppose curiosity. Presuppose exploration. Presuppose thinking. For example, as you look at it from this angle, when you consider the trade-off, once you compare these 2 outcomes, these presuppositions guide the listener into analysis without commanding them to agree. And once someone is analyzing the frame you set, agreement becomes more likely without you forcing it. Here's a pattern you should memorize because it works in almost every conversation. Pace, presuppose, offer choice. It sounds like, I can see you're weighing this carefully. So as you think it through, Do you want to start with the simplest version or go straight to the deeper layer? That sentence does four things. It respects the listener. It presupposes they will think it through. It offers a choice that keeps forward movement. It positions you as a guide, not a pusher. Now, let's talk about the most advanced use of presuppositions. Presupposing value without selling. Selling language creates defenses because people have been trained to detect it. The moment your words smell like persuasion, the listener's mind becomes a shield. So instead of selling value, you presuppose that value will be discovered. For example, when you start using this, you'll notice how quickly people relax around you. This presupposes a technique works, but it also frames the result as a personal discovery, not a claim you're forcing. Even cleaner, you might notice a subtle shift the first time you try it. That one is powerful because it contains uncertainty. It doesn't feel like a hard push. It feels like a realistic invitation. This is how you avoid sounding scripted. If you sound too certain, too perfect, too designed, people distrust it. The best hypnotic language often includes softeners that feel human. Maybe you'll notice sometimes people find that you may discover soft language doesn't mean weak authority. It means you're not coercing, you're guiding. Now, there's a dark side here that I'm going to expose so you don't accidentally drift into it. Some people use presuppositions to implant guilt, obligation, or shame. Since you care about me, you'll do this. If you respected me, you wouldn't question it. Because you're loyal, you'll say yes. That's not influence. That's emotional leverage. It works temporarily, and then it destroys relationships, teams, and reputation. In this audiobook, the purpose is power with structure and respect. If your patterns require the other person to feel smaller, you are not building influence, you are borrowing it. And borrowed power always comes with interest. So here's the ethical filter you should apply every time you use a presupposition. Does this presupposition increase clarity, safety, and direction? Or does it increase pressure, guilt, and cornering? If it increases pressure, remove it. Now, let's build a practical arsenal. You need presuppositions for 5 real-world goals: getting attention, reducing resistance, steering decisions, building authority, repairing conversations. For attention, the best presuppositions are curiosity-based. As you hear this next part, in a moment you'll notice something. Once you see the pattern. For reducing resistance, the best presuppositions include freedom. You don't have to agree. Just consider, as you think about it at your pace, before you decide anything. For steering decisions, use process presuppositions plus options. After you compare the outcomes, do you prefer A or B? When you're ready to move forward, do you want a fast route or the safe route? For authority, use identity and sequence presuppositions that feel calm. Let's handle this step by step. Once we clarify the goal, the solution becomes obvious. Authority is not aggression. Authority is structure. For repair, use presuppositions that assume alignment without blaming. Let's reset for a second. Once we remove the misunderstanding, this gets simple. Notice the difference. You're not accusing. You're leading the conversation back to stability. Now, here's the training method. Because understanding presuppositions intellectually is not enough. You need them to become automatic. Do this drill every day for 10 minutes. Take 5 ordinary sentences you would normally say, then rewrite them in 3 versions. Version A, neutral statement. Version B, with a time presupposition. Version C, with a freedom-based presupposition. Example sentence: I want you to listen to this idea. Neutral: here's an idea. Time presupposition: as you listen to this idea, notice how it changes the outcome. Freedom-based: you don't have to agree, just listen to structure and see what stands out. This drill trains you to guide without pressure. Now let's apply it to your whole style. Your voice, the one that works for ambitious men, should feel like this: calm, controlled, precise, no begging, no chasing, no hype. Presuppositions match that energy perfectly because they don't sound emotional. They sound certain, like you already live in the frame you're describing. But there is one final key. Presuppositions work best when you combine them with pacing. When you describe what is true right now, then presuppose what happens next. If you skip pacing, presuppositions can feel like an agenda. If you pace first, presuppositions feel like leadership. So in the next chapter, we're going to sharpen pacing and leading into an agreement ladder, a structure that makes people feel understood first and guided second. Because once someone feels understood, they stop defending. And when they stop defending, your words land deeper. Remember this: presuppositions don't force reality. They offer a frame that the mind can step into. Use them with precision. Use them with respect. And you'll notice something that most people never experience. You won't need to argue to be heard. Your language will do the work for you. Most people misunderstand rapport. They think rapport is being liked, smiling, agreeing, matching someone's energy, acting friendly. That's surface level. Real rapport is deeper. Rapport is when another person's nervous system decides, this person is safe to follow. Not safe as in harmless. Safe as in predictable, grounded, competent, and calibrated. The kind of safety that allows the mind to relax its defenses and allocate attention. And that's why pacing and leading matter. If you try to lead without pacing, you trigger resistance. If you pace without leading, you become background noise. The skill is learning to build an agreement ladder. Small, undeniable truths that create momentum, so your guidance feels natural rather than forced. Pacing is the act of describing the listener's reality so accurately that they can't help but nod internally. It's not flattery. It's precision. It's psychological accuracy. Leading is the act of moving from what is true now to what could be true next, without making the listener feel pushed. When people say, "I feel manipulated," what they often mean is, you try to lead me without acknowledging where I am. You skip my reality and jump to your agenda. Pacing is how you earn the right to lead. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The human brain is constantly scanning for mismatch. When it senses mismatch between your words and the listener's experience, it flags danger. Not physical danger, social danger, psychological danger. The danger of being controlled, judged, rushed, or misunderstood. That danger triggers micro-resistance, less attention, shorter answers, skepticism, sarcasm, disengagement. Not because your idea is wrong, because your deliveries signal threat. Pacing neutralizes threat by proving through language that you can see clearly. There are 3 levels of pacing you must master: sensory pacing, emotional pacing, and identity pacing. Sensory pacing is the most objective. It's what a camera would see. It's the easiest form of agreement because it's undeniable. You're sitting there listening. You've had a long day. There are a few things on your mind. Used correctly, sensory pacing anchors the listener in reality and builds a baseline of yes without needing them to say yes. But if you overdo it, it becomes obvious and childish. You don't narrate their entire life. You choose 1 or 2 accurate observations that signal awareness. Emotional pacing is describing the internal state without being dramatic. You're curious, but you're also skeptical. Part of you wants to believe this, and part of you wants proof. You don't want hype, you want something you can actually use. This form is powerful because it makes people feel seen. And when people feel seen, they relax. When they relax, they listen. But emotional pacing must be careful. If you mislabel the emotion, you break rapport instantly. The listener thinks, no, that's not what I feel. And now you look like someone with an agenda. So the rule is simple. Emotionally pace what is likely in general, not what is specific and risky. Use paired states that cover both sides. Curious and skeptical. Interested but cautious. Open but not naive. That creates accuracy without cornering. Identity pacing is the deepest. It describes how the listener sees themselves. You're not the type to accept things blindly. You care about results more than appearances. You value control and clarity. Identity pacing is powerful because it aligns your message with who the listener believes they are. But identity pacing also carries the highest risk. If you get it wrong, you don't just miss their emotion, you challenge their self-image. That creates defense. So you never use identity pacing to shame. You use it to respect and invite. You don't say, if you were strong, you'd do this. That's a trap. You say, people who value strength tend to prefer methods that reduce friction. That's a door. Now, once you pace, you lead. But the lead must be small enough that it feels like the next step, not a jump. This is where most people fail. They pace one sentence and then try to lead to a conclusion that's 10 steps ahead. It sounds like this: I understand you're stressed, so you should buy this. That's not leading. That's exploiting. Clean leading moves in increments. From reality to interpretation, from interpretation to possibility, from possibility to action. Here's the basic pattern. Pace reality, pace emotion, offer frame, lead action. Example, you've probably had moments where you tried to explain yourself and felt them pulling away. That's frustrating. And it's not because you're wrong. It's because your structure triggers resistance. So instead of pushing the point, try guiding their attention first and watch what happens. Notice the flow. It's not a command. It's a sequence that the mind can follow. Now, let's build the agreement ladder. An agreement ladder is a series of small statements that are easy to accept. Each yes isn't about obedience. It's about momentum. It's about aligning your language with the listener's reality, so the conversation stops feeling like a fight. A good agreement ladder has 3 characteristics. First, it starts with the undeniable. Second, it moves toward meaning. Third, it opens a direction. Undeniable. You want a better result. Meaning, so the way you communicate matters. Direction. Let's adjust the structure. The reason this works is because the brain hates contradiction in sequences. When it agrees with the first steps, it becomes more open to the next step, if that step feels connected. This is also why the cheap 3 yes trick sometimes feels manipulative. Not because building agreement is wrong, but because people use irrelevant agreements. They ask, "Is the sky blue?" just to get yes. That's insulting. It signals you're playing a game. Your agreement ladder must be relevant and respectful. Here's a clean version. You're listening to this because you want control over outcomes. You've seen how words can shift people. And you're not interested in hype. You're interested in methods that work in real conversations. Each sentence is plausible and aligned with the listener's purpose. It doesn't feel like a trick. It feels like recognition. Then you lead. So let's build mechanics step by step. Now we need to talk about calibration, because pacing and leading are not fixed scripts. They are responsive skills. You must recognize whether the listener is open, neutral, or closed. An open listener gives you length. They answer fully. They lean forward. Their eyes stay on you. A neutral listener gives you short but polite responses. They're evaluating. A closed listener interrupts, challenges, jokes, or withdraws. If you lead hard with a closed listener, you lose them. They feel controlled and push back. If you pace too long with an open listener, you bore them. They feel stalled. So your pacing to leading ratio changes with the state. Open, 20% pace, 80% lead. Neutral, 50% pace, 50% lead. Closed, 80% pace, 20% lead, plus permission. Permission is the secret weapon in closed states, because permission lowers threat. You don't have to agree. You can take what fits and ignore what doesn't. No need to decide now. When people feel free, they stop fighting. That sounds paradoxical, but it's human. Most resistance is not against your idea. It's against the feeling of being cornered. Now let's add an advanced layer, pacing with contrast. Instead of only describing what is, you describe what has been failing and why. You've probably noticed that when you push a point, people defend. And when they defend, they stop listening. That's why force creates the opposite of influence. This pacing does 2 things. It mirrors experience and provides a meaningful explanation. That explanation becomes a bridge to your lead. Your lead then becomes a relief, not a demand. So instead of force, we use structure. Now here's the most important correction. Pacing is not agreeing with their worldview. It's acknowledging their experience. You can pace someone's frustration without validating their irrational story. You can pace their fear without confirming their paranoia. You can pace their anger without approving their aggression. Example, I can see this situation has been frustrating. That paces experience. It does not say, "You're right to hate everyone." That would be agreement with a worldview. This is how you stay ethical while staying powerful. You are not there to flatter. You are there to lead people toward clarity and better outcomes. Now, let's talk about the most advanced form of leading. Leading attention instead of leading conclusions. Most people try to lead to an outcome. Agree with me. Advanced speakers lead attention. Look here. Notice this. Compare that. When you lead attention, the listener arrives at conclusions without being forced. That's cleaner. It's also more durable. Here are 3 leads that rarely trigger resistance. Notice, consider, compare. They're invitations, not commands, and they still control direction. Example, notice how your body reacts when someone pressures you. Now compare that to how you respond when someone guides you calmly. You're leading them into a conclusion, but you're not telling them what to believe. You're letting their nervous system learn. Now, let's give you a practical script you can use in any real conversation where you need to regain control. It's a reset ladder. Let's slow it down for a second. I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. What matters most to you here? Speed, quality, or certainty? This paces the moment, signals leadership, and gives a structured choice that keeps forward motion. You didn't argue. You didn't apologize. You guided. Here's another version for conflict. I can see this matters. And I'm not here to fight you. I want a clean outcome. So let's clarify the goal first, and then we'll handle the details. That paces emotion, adds permission, sets frame, and leads into sequence. You are acting like the adult in the room. That's influence. Now, the last piece, the agreement ladder must end with an action that is small and easy. If the action is too big, the listener's brain will resist. So instead of, "So commit to this right now," you say, "Try it once." Test it in the next conversation. Use it for one sentence. Small actions create real-world feedback. Feedback creates belief. Belief creates long-term change. In the next chapter, we're going to take this one step further into attention engineering, open loops, curiosity gaps, and how to structure long-form speech so the listener's mind keeps leaning forward. But before we move on, lock this into your system. Pace earns trust. Leading creates direction. Agreement ladders create momentum. Permission prevents resistance. Most people try to overpower the room. Advanced speakers do something more effective. They make following feel natural. Attention is not a polite request. Attention is a biological decision. The human brain is built to conserve energy. It does not want to process everything. It filters. It prioritizes. It looks for novelty, threat, reward, and meaning. Then it locks onto what feels most relevant. That's why most communication fails. People speak as if the listener is obligated to track every sentence. The brain disagrees. The brain drifts. The brain starts thinking about something else. Not because the listener is rude, but because the speaker didn't engineer attention. Advanced hypnotic language patterns are not about hypnosis like a stage trick. They are about attention design, controlling what the listener's mind focuses on, when it focuses, and why it keeps focusing. The most reliable way to do that is with open loops. An open loop is an unfinished pattern. a question not yet answered, a concept introduced but not resolved, a promise made and held in suspense. When you open a loop, the brain feels a mild tension. I need to know what happens next. That tension pulls attention forward. But open loops have a rule. If you open loops and don't close them, you lose trust. The listener may not consciously say, "This person is unreliable," but their attention will stop investing. They will feel tricked. They will drift faster next time. So we're going to master open loops the ethical way. Curiosity with delivery. There are 3 types of open loops you must understand: informational loops, identity loops, and outcome loops. Informational loops are the simplest. You hint at a piece of knowledge, then delay the full reveal. In a moment, I'll show you the one shift that changes how people respond to your voice. The brain wants the one shift, but the key is that the delay must be short and justified. You can't tease for 5 minutes. You tease, then you build a frame, then you deliver. Identity loops are deeper. They make the listener wonder something about themselves. There's a reason you're drawn to influence and control, and it's not what most people think. Now, the listener isn't just curious about information. They're curious about their own identity. That's sticky attention. Outcome loops are the strongest. They promise a result. By the end of this chapter, you'll be able to keep someone listening without raising your voice, without repeating yourself, and without chasing their approval. Now, the brain is waiting for a capability. If you want to keep attention for long-form audio, like your audiobook format, you need to stack these loops carefully. Not too many, not too few. Here's the truth. Most people either do 0 loops boring, or they do endless loops clickbait. Both lose. The sweet spot is loop stacking with closure discipline. Loop stacking means you open a primary loop at the beginning, then you open smaller loops inside it, and you close them in a planned sequence. The listener feels constant micro-resolution, like steps forward, while still being pulled by the main unanswered question. Think of it as tension, release, tension, release. This rhythm is what keeps attention alive. Now let's build mechanics. Open loops work because the brain hates incomplete patterns. This is why cliffhangers work. It's why unfinished melodies stick in your head. It's why you can't ignore an unanswered question. Your job as a speaker is to create clean incompletion. Here are the most reliable loop openers. In a moment, here's what most people miss. The reason is there's a pattern behind this. This changes everything but before we get there, first, understand this. Now, let's build your practical toolkit. Open loop patterns you can use in real conversations. The process loop. Before you answer, consider one thing. You open a loop by delaying their response and guiding attention. The missing piece loop, you're not wrong. You're just missing one piece. The brain wants the missing piece. The contrast loop, there are 2 ways this goes. Now they want to hear both. The result loop, do this once and notice what changes. Now they're curious about the change. The identity loop, if you're serious about control, you'll recognize this. Now they want to see if they qualify. Again, use ethically. Identity loops should invite, not shame. Now let's talk about closure. Closing loops is how you build trust. It's how you train the listener to keep paying attention, because they learn that attention gets rewarded. There are 3 clean closers. Here's the point, then a short summary. So what this means is, then a practical implication. The takeaway is, then a simple action. The best closure is specific. Bad closure. So, yeah, it's about mindset. That's nothing. Good closure. So the takeaway is this. If you open a loop, close it within 2 minutes and reward attention with a concrete example. Now, a warning. Open loops are addictive. You can get drunk on them. You can try to turn every sentence into tension. And if you do that, you create anxiety, not attention. Attention needs rhythm. In a strong audiobook chapter, you should feel like control pulse, tension, release, movement, calm, then tension again. This is dominance without aggression. Now we're ready for the bridge to the next chapter. Chapter 5 will teach embedded commands, how to place direction inside ordinary sentences so the listener feels guided without feeling pushed. Embedded commands are not about controlling people. They're about controlling the flow of attention, emotion, and choice. But before we go there, lock this into your system. Open loops create tension. Closures create trust. Examples create reality. Rhythm keeps attention alive. If you can engineer attention, you don't need to chase it. You become the person people naturally listen to. When you understand that attention is not politeness but biology, you stop being offended by people and you start working with how they actually function. And here's the part most people miss. They learn techniques, but they don't learn ethos. Because technique without ethics makes you fast but empty. Yes, you can learn to open loops in a way that makes someone stick to your words. But if they leave the conversation with the feeling that you pulled a string inside their mind, you lose. Maybe not today, maybe not immediately, but later, because the brain remembers. That was tension without reward. So now I'll give you the closing frame, simple but ruthless. It's what separates a master from a manipulator. There are 2 types of influence. 1, you take attention. 2, you earn attention. On the surface, they can sound similar, but underneath, different energy, different structure, different outcome. When you take attention, you live on the needle of tension, secret, shock, wait for it. You won't believe this. And eventually the listener is watching but not trusting, listening but not following. It's a loud engine with no traction. When you earn attention, you do something more powerful. You train the listener's brain that attention around you pays off. And then even silence works. Even a pause works. Even one short sentence lands. Remember the rule about closing loops? Now we strengthen it. A loop should not be closed with an answer. It should be closed with an upgrade. Every closure must leave the listener stronger. A line they can repeat, a principle they can test, an action they can do today. Here is weak influence. I'm about to reveal the secret. The secret is confidence. And here is strong influence. In a moment, I'll show you one shift that changes how people respond to your voice. And you'll test it today. Speak half a tone lower, pause after the keyword, and don't explain yourself. Feel the difference? The second version creates evidence. And evidence is fuel for trust. Now lock in one more thing. Attention is not held by tension alone. It is held by the feeling that you're leading. People don't want to drown in words. They want the sensation. This voice knows where it's going. So for long-form audio, you don't just need structure, you need a route. A route sounds like this. Here's where you are. Here's what we'll do. Here's how you'll know it's working. Here's what happens next. When the brain sees a route, it relaxes. And when the brain relaxes, it holds attention longer. That's why the most powerful influence feels calm. Not because it's soft, because it's controlled. You're not frantic. You're not begging. You're not chasing. You set the rhythm. And now we close the primary loop of this chapter. You don't want tricks. You wanted a capability. The ability to hold attention without raising your voice, without repeating yourself, without chasing approval. And now you have the spine of that capability. You open loops only when you have something real to pay with. You close loops fast, clean, and specific. You feed the listener micro examples every 45 to 90 seconds. You alternate tension and release so attention doesn't turn into anxiety. You'll be surprised how quickly people begin to respond differently, because most people live in chaos, and the brain is exhausted from it. When a clear line appears, a controlled rhythm, reliable closures, the brain exhales and says, okay, it's safe to listen here. And here's the final sentence I want you to remember, not just with your mind, but with your body. Attention is not something you get. Attention is something you earn when every few minutes you prove. With me, things become clearer, stronger, sharper. Now we're ready for the next layer. In the next chapter, we enter a technique that looks like ordinary speech, but functions like a steering wheel. Embedded commands. Not to break people, but to guide attention so smoothly they feel freedom. And that is exactly why they follow you. And before we go there, burn this rule into your system. Open it, close it, promise, deliver, say it, show it. And if you do that, you'll never have to fight for attention again. It moves toward the place where it isn't betrayed.